Section 18 of Little Journeys to the Homes of Great Scientists. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. Little Journeys to the Homes of Great Scientists by Elbert Hubbard. Thomas H. Huxley. Part 2. It is a fine thing to be a great scientist, but it is a yet finer thing to be a great man. The one element in Huxley's life that makes his character stand out clear, sharp, and well defined, was his steadfast devotion to truth. The only thing he feared was self-deception. When he uttered his classic cry in defense of Darwin, there was no ulterior motive in it. No thought that he was attaching himself to a popular success, no idea that he was linking his name with greatness. What he felt was true, he uttered, and the strong desire of his soul was that he might never compromise with the error for the sake of mental ease, or accept a belief simply because it was pleasant. Huxley once wrote this terse sentence of Gladstone: "It is to me a serious thing that the destinies of this great country should at present be to a large extent in the hands of a man who, whatever he may be in the affairs of which I am no judge, is nothing but a copious shuffler in those that I do understand." Gladstone crossed swords with Huxley, Spencer, and Robert Ingersoll, and in each case his blundering intellect looked like a raft of logs compared with a steamboat that responds to the helm. Gladstone was a man of action, and silence to such is most becoming. He had a belief, that was enough. He should have hugged it close, and never stood up to explain it. Let us vary a simile just used. Lincoln once referred to an opponent as being like a certain steamboat that ran on the Sangamon. This boat had so big a whistle that when she blew it there wasn't steam enough to make her run, and when she ran she couldn't whistle. Huxley, Spencer, and Robert Ingersoll all made Gladstone cut for the woods and cover his retreat in a cloud of words. Ingersoll once said that in replying to Gladstone he felt like a man who had been guilty of cruelty to children. If one wants to see how pitifully weak Gladstone could be in an argument, let him refer to the North American Review for 1882. Yet Ingersoll was surely lacking in the passion for truth that characterized Huxley. Ingersoll was always a prosecutor or a defender. The lawyer habit was strong upon him. Just a little more bias in his clay, and he would have made a model bishop. His stock of science was almost as meagre as that of Samuel Wilberforce, and he seldom hesitated to turn the laugh on an adversary, even at the expense of truth. When brought to book for his indictment of Moses without giving that great man any credit for the sublime things he did do, or making allowances for the barbaric horde with which he had to deal, Bob evaded the proposition by saying, "I am not the attorney of Moses. He has more than 3,000,000 men looking after his case." Again, in that most charming lecture on Shakespeare, Ingersoll proves that Bacon did not write the plays, by picking out various detached passages of Bacon, which no one for a moment ever claimed revealed the genius of the man. With equal plausibility he could prove that the author of Hamlet was a weakling, by selecting all the obscure and stupid passages, and parading these with the unexplained fact that the play opens with the spirit of a dead man coming back to earth, and a little later in the same play Shakespeare has the man who interviewed the ghost tell of "that bourne from whence no traveller returns." Even Shakespeare was not a genius all the time. And Ingersoll, the searcher for truth, borrowed from his friends the priests the cheerful habit of secreting the particular thing that would not help the cause in hand. But one of the best things in Ingersoll's character was that he realized his lapses, and in private acknowledged them. On reading the smooth, florid, and plausible sophistry of Wilberforce, Ingersoll once said, "Be easy on Soapy Sam. A few years ago, a little shifting of base on the part of my ancestors, and I would probably have had Soapy Sam's job." This resemblance of opposites makes a person think of that remark applied to Voltaire: "He was the father of all those who wear shovel hats." When Thomas Huxley and his wife arrived in New York, in 1876, on a visit to the Centennial Exhibition, this interesting item was flashed over the country: "Huxley and his titled bride have arrived in New York on their wedding journey." This item caused Mr. and Mrs. Huxley, both of them Royal Democrats, more joy than did the most complimentary interview. At home they had left a charming brood of 7 children, 3 of them nearly grown ups. Huxley sent Tyndall, who a few months before had married a daughter of Lord Hamilton, the clipping and this note: "You see how that once I am in a democratic country, I am pulling all the honors I can in my own direction." The next letter the Huxleys received from Tyndall was addressed "Sir Thomas and Lady Huxley." Huxley never stood in much awe of the nobility. He evidently felt that there was another kind of which he himself in degree was heir. Huxley never had a better friend than Sir Joseph Hooker, and we see in his letters such postscripts as this: "Dear Sir Joseph, do come and dine with us. It is a month since we have seen your homely old phiz." And Sir Joseph replies that he will be on hand the next Sunday evening, and offers this mild suggestion: "Scientific gents as has countenances as curdles milk, should not cast aspersions on men made in image of Maker." The wordy duel between Huxley and Gladstone prompted Toole, the great comedian, to send a box of grease paints to Huxley with a note saying, "These are for you and Gladstone to use when you make up." It was a joke so subtle and choice that the Huxleys, always dear friends of Toole, laughed for a week. Poor Gladstone required a diagram when he heard of the procedure, and then, not being trepanned for the pleasantry, remarked that if Toole and Huxley collaborated on the stage, it would be eminently the proper thing, and in his mind there was little choice between them, both being fine actors. Later we hear of Huxley saying he thought of sending the box of grease paints to Gladstone, so the Premier could use them in making up with God. As for himself, he was like Thoreau, and never quarrelled with him. Huxley had many friendships with people seemingly outside of his own particular line of work. Henry Irving, the Reverend Dr. Parker, John Fiske, and Hall Caine once met at one of the Huxleys' tall teas, and Dr. Parker explained that he personally had no objection to visiting with sinners. For Parker, Huxley had a great admiration, and often attended the Thursday noon meeting at the Temple, to see and hear the greatest actor in England, a compliment which Parker much appreciated, otherwise he would not have repeated it. "If I ever take to the stage, I will play the part of Jakes or Touchstone," said Huxley. John Fiske, in his delightful essay on Huxley, said that in the Huxley home there was more jest, joke, and banter than in any other place in London. The air was surcharged with mirth, and puns, very often bad ones, were often tossed back and forth with great recklessness. At one time John Fiske was at the Huxleys, and the dual or multiple nature of man came up for discussion. Huxley spoke of how very often men who were gentle and charming in their homes were capable of great crimes, and of how, on the other hand, a man might pass in the world as a philanthropist, and yet in his household be a veritable autocrat and tyrant. Fiske then incidentally mentioned the case of Doctors Parker and Webster of Harvard, men of intellect and worth. These men brooded over a misunderstanding that grew into a grudge and eventually hatched murder. One worthy professor killed the other, cut up the body, and tried to burn it in a chemist's retort. Only the great difficulty of reducing the human body to ashes caused the murder to out, and brought about the hanging of a scientist of note. "Yes, I have thought of the difficulty of disposing of a dead body," said Huxley, solemnly, and often when on the point of committing murder this was the only thing that made me hesitate." "Oh, Pater, we are ashamed of you," said his three lovely daughters in concert. Huxley's ability to joke and his appreciation of the ludicrous marked him, in the mind of John Fiske, as the greatest thinker of his time. The humorist knows values, and that is why he laughs. Sensibility is, in fact, the basic element of wit. Huxley's duties on the Rattlesnake were not in the line of science. His rank was assistant surgeon, but as sure enough surgeons were only sent out on bigger craft, he was the ship's doctor. With the captain's help the men were kept busy, but not too busy, and the food and regulations were such that about all Huxley had to do was to look upon his work and pronounce it good. As a physician, Huxley practiced throughout his life the science of prevention. "With a prophetic vision, quite unconscious, my parents named me after that particular apostle I was to admire most," once said Huxley. He was a doubter by instinct, and approached the world of nature as if nothing were known about it. His work on the Medusa won him the recognition of the British Society, and this secured him the coveted surgeon's commission. Two tragedies confront man on his journey through life: one when he wants a thing and cannot get it, the other when he gets the thing and finds he does not want it. Having secured his surgeon's commission, Huxley felt a strong repulsion towards devoting his life to the abnormal. "I am a scientist by nature, and my business is to teach," he wrote to his affianced wife. These were wise words which he had learned from her, but which he repeated, seemingly quite innocent of their source. We take our own wherever we find it. Miss Heathorn admired a surgeon, but loved a scientist, and Huxley, being a man, was making a heroic struggle to be what the young woman most wished. Love supplies an ideal, and that is the very best thing love does, with possibly an exception or two. So behold a ship's surgeon in London, full-fledged, refusing offers of position, and even declining to take a choice of ships, for such is the perversity of things animate and inanimate that, when we do not want things, fate brings them to us on silver platters and begs us to accept. We win by indifference as much as by desire. I have declined to ship on board the Cormorant as head surgeon, and have applied to the University of Toronto for a position as Professor of Natural History. And so America had Huxley flung at her head. Toronto considered, and the Canadian sat on the case, and after considerable correspondence the vacant chair was given to a Professor Baldini of the Whitby Ladies' College. It was a close call for Canada. Huxley had imagined that the New World offered special advantages to a rising young person of scientific bent, but now he secured a marriage license, and settled down as lecturer at the School of Mines. A little later he began to teach at the Royal College of Surgeons, with which institution he was to be connected the rest of his life, and fill almost any chair that happened to be vacant. From the time he was 27, Huxley never had to look for work. He was known as a writer of worth, and as a lecturer his services were in demand. He became president of the Geological and Ethnological Society, was appointed Royal Commissioner for the Advancement of Science, was a member of the London School Board, Secretary of the Royal Society, Lord Rector of the University of Aberdeen, President of the Royal Society, and refused an offer to become Custodian of the British Museum, a life position, and where he had once applied for a clerkship. In letters to Darwin he occasionally signed his name with all titles, added thus: Thomas Henry Huxley, M.B., M.D., Ph.D., LL.D., F.R.S. of Her Majesty's Navy. Huxley was a forceful and epigrammatic writer, and had a command of English second to no scientist that England has ever produced. He was the only one of his group who had a distinct literary style. As a speaker he was quiet, deliberate, decisive, sure, and he carried enough reserve caloric so that he made his presence felt in any assemblage before he said a word, In oratory it is personality that gives ballast. Of his 40 or so published books, Man's Place in Nature, Elementary Physiology, and Classification of Animals have been translated into many languages, and now serve as textbooks in various schools and colleges. Huxley is the founder of the so-called agnostic school, which has the peculiarity of not being a school. The word agnostic was given its vogue by Huxley. To superficial people it was quite often used synonymously with infidel and freethinker, both words of reproach. To Huxley it meant simply one who did not know, but wished to learn. The controlling impulse of Huxley's life was his absolute honesty. To pretend to believe a thing against which one's reason revolts, in order to better one's place in society, was to him the sum of all that was intellectually base. He regarded man as an undeveloped creature, and for this creature to lay the flattering unction to his soul that he was in special communication with the Infinite, and in possession of the secrets of the Creator, was something that in itself proved that man was as yet in the barbaric stage. Said Huxley, "As to the final truths of creation and destiny, I am an agnostic. I do not know, hence I neither affirm nor deny." Humour and common sense usually go together. Huxley had a goodly stock of both. When George Eliot died, there was very earnest but ill-directed effort made to have her body buried at Westminster Abbey. Huxley, being close to the Dean, serving with him on several municipal boards, was importuned by Spencer to use his influence toward the desired end. Huxley saw the incongruity of the situation, and in a letter that reveals the logical mind and the direct literary Huxley quality, he placed his gentle veto on the proposition, and thus saved the enemy the mortification of having to do so. Darwin is buried in Westminster Abbey, but this was not to be the final resting place of the dust of Mill, Tyndall, Spencer, George Eliot, or Huxley. These had all stood in the fore of the fight against superstition, and had both given and received blows. The pantheon of such battle-scarred heroes was to be the hearts of those who prize above all that earth can bestow the benison of the God within. "Above all else let me preserve my integrity of intellect," said Huxley. Here is Huxley's letter to Spencer: 4 Marlborough Place, December 1880. My dear Spencer, your telegram which reached me on Friday evening caused me great perplexity, inasmuch as I had been just talking to Morley, and agreeing with him that the proposal for a funeral in Westminster Abbey had a very questionable look to us, who desired nothing so much as that peace and honour should attend George Eliot to her grave. It can hardly be doubted that the proposal will be bitterly opposed, possibly, as happened in Mill's case with less provocation, with the raking up of past histories, about which the opinion, even of those who have least the desire or the right to be pharisaical, is strongly divided, and which had better be forgotten. With respect to putting pressure on the Dean of Westminster, I have to consider that he has some confidence in me, and before asking him to do something for which he is pretty sure to be violently assailed, I have to ask myself whether I really think it a right thing for a man in his position to do. Now I cannot say I do. However much I may lament the circumstance, Westminster Abbey is a Christian church, and not a pantheon, and the dean thereof is officially a Christian priest, and we ask him to bestow exceptional Christian honours by this burial in the Abbey. George Eliot is known not only as a great writer, but as a person whose life and opinions were in notorious antagonism to Christian practice in regard to marriage, and Christian theory in regard to dogma. How am I to tell the Dean that I think he ought to read over the body of a person who did not repent of what the Church considers mortal sin, a service not one solitary proposition of which she would have accepted for truth while she was alive? How am I to urge him to do that which, if I were in his place, I should most emphatically refuse to do? You tell me that Mrs. Cross wished for the funeral in the Abbey. While I desire to entertain the greatest respect for her wishes, I am very sorry to hear it. I do not understand the feeling which could create such a desire on any personal grounds, save those of affection, and the natural yearning to be near, even in death, those whom we have loved. And on public grounds the wish is still less intelligible to me. One cannot eat one's cake and have it too. Those who elect to be free in thought and deed must not hanker after the rewards, if they are to be so called, which the world offers to those who put up with its fetters. Thus, however I look at the proposal, it seems to me to be a profound mistake, and I can have nothing to do with it. I shall be deeply grieved if this resolution is ascribed to any other motives than those which I have set forth in greater length than I intended. Ever yours very faithfully, T.H. Huxley. End of Section 18.